I have probably never done this before. Today's guest, David Turner. They've been together, worked together for the last 40 years, and they run the largest database of gyms research reports in the UK. Today's episode is for anybody who wants to understand what fitness entrepreneurship is. How do you make a company? How do you make it go public? What mistakes can you make? What's the future of the industry? Do you run a boutique gym? How do you make it successful? How do you compete with a big box gym? And everything in between. The name is legendary. David Turner. I don't know what's with the fitness industry and the name we've got.
Maybe it's because a youngster compared to us. He came a lot later.
He would love this actually. This could make a good reel of it. David Stocker is a youngster. He would love this. He was actually very good at paddle this time. We were in Saudi, I think last week, and Dave Stocker and I, we played together, and he was actually very good. And surprisingly, and I think it's to do with the fact that he trains himself still very regularly. And I remember when you'd gone to this to the Fairmont to see everybody, of all the people, Dave Stocker was the one who was wearing his My Zone. He said, I've come back, I had to train, and he was the one who was training when everybody else was sitting in the restaurant. So yeah, I think that's why he's a legend. This is going to be really interesting. I've never done something like this before where, I would call this the, going down the memory lane, looking at the rear view mirror, right? I think there's so much we can learn from what's happened in the past, right? I remember we speaking about, your first endeavor as into the fitness app or wearable space, which obviously I didn't know of, and I'm from the industry. So, I think this will be very interesting, the discussion. If you were to look at India as a market, which we spoke about, we don't have an understanding of the data, right? We don't even have data in the first place. So I think the part one is to have data, and then the part two is to get some understanding around it. So I think the conversation today is going to be around what we can learn from the past. Let's go back to 1979. I know we have to go back to 1975, 76, but 79 when you started. What did you start? And why should people listen to this podcast in terms of what you've done, as entrepreneurs? Your viewers are entrepreneurs in the fitness industry, or they could be just, industry agnostic viewers. What do you think they will take back from this podcast?
Well, I think the first thing they have to do is listen to people who have gone through the processes so that they can learn from any of that experience. But the first thing they have to do, and the most important thing they have to do all the way through, is challenge themselves. All the information you get from anybody is one thing, but unless you've got within you, unless you have the various skills, the components, and the sort of determination that entrepreneurs need, then it doesn't matter who you listen to, and it doesn't matter how much information you get, you're not going to be successful. You also have to have a huge degree of passion, and that's probably where I started. But I also started basically because of world events. I happened to be working, I took a degree in geography and worked in property and estate management, and October War of 1973 in the Middle East, oil prices shot through the roof, economies across the Western world were shot, and everybody was trying to find someone to blame, as sadly that's what happens. No one's ever prepared to take any responsibility themselves, always find someone to blame. And there were a series of tax legislations that were going to come in to this country, one of which did arrive and the other of which didn't. There were two property taxes, and at that time I had a piece of land that we were going to develop as a warehouse and commercial development, and I was a very keen squash player. Not very good, I have to emphasize, but a very keen one. You know the sort of people, the ones who turn up for any game and get thrashed, but are very happy to do that so long as they can have a game. And it occurred to me that we couldn't, because of the legislation that was coming in, which is too long a story to deal with now, that there was a discouragement to build any building that was going to be let to someone else. So we had to occupy the building ourselves if we were going to use it. And I suddenly thought, well, let's build a squash club. And as soon as the architect told me that we couldn't because of the configuration of the site, that was like lighting the blue touch paper for me. I had to prove him wrong. I went through a process there. 1979, when we opened our first club. Today, entrepreneurs look at their investment and think 5% is a huge base rate for them. When I opened my first club, base rate was up at 16% in the UK. No young people can even begin to understand what that meant. And if you borrow, as you will for a speculative venture, at 3 or 4 above base rate, I was paying 20% interest on my first club.
That's highway robbery.
Yeah,
20%.
It is. So people don't really understand. But the next stage is you have to be prepared to keep on getting up and coming back. It's like the boxer in the ring. You know, if you keep getting up, you're still in the game. The second you lie on the floor, you know, after a punch, you're out of the game.
Yeah.
And if it's important to you and your passion is there, then you have to build on that. You have to feed off that and just keep going and keep going and keep going. So I opened my first club in 1979. It was called City Squash. It was central London, just off centre. And it was the first air-conditioned squash courts in London. There were 8 courts. It was a fabulous club, and we had a gym attached to it, which again was the first squash club which had a gym. But if you want to begin to understand where the industry's going, you need to understand where it came from. You know, people think that you can every day is a new start, which it is, but every day inherits the stories of the past, and to understand the stories of the past is a crucial part of understanding where it will go.
Well,
so in the UK, sport and fitness and exercise was largely, if you go back to the end of the 19th century, beginning of the 20th century, all the way through even to now, I would say to some degree, was the domain of the middle and upper classes. So, for example, and nobody ever paid for these things. So if you went to a public school, you had the best sports facilities, but you never paid for them at source. If you went to university, you had terrific sports facilities. You never paid for them at source. If you were in the army, which, you know, that covers the whole range of upper middle class, and think you will see that in the army, fantastic sports facilities, nobody ever paid for them. The early Olympics were made up of upper class people, predominantly, who played sport. In the 1940s, 50s, the post-war period in particular, there were set up green belts around towns because towns were smog, you know, as in India now, and in China now. Many of the places they're uninhabitable because of the smog there. So local authorities in the UK set up what they call green belts, which were areas around the city where people could go and play. You know, there were football pitches. All around England, you'll see areas where they've got perhaps 100 football pitches.
Yeah.
You know, I used to play in a place called Hackney Marshes in London, where I used to go. There must have been 200-300 football pitches, and all teams would register to go there. So the green belt created that. But it was always subsidised by the local authority. Then later on, local authorities built sports centres, as they are up and down the country. They're all subsidised, right? The prices are cut and they're subsidised. So no one ever actually paid the right price in the UK for sport. Tennis clubs, for example. Tennis clubs are always owned by the members.
Yeah.
Members' clubs, they were called.
Correct.
So the members never paid commercially. They just paid to keep it afloat. They didn't do that, and they kept the courts for themselves and played there. So no one ever really understood what the finance of sport and exercise was. Now, in the 1960s, along came entrepreneurs who decided to develop squash further. Squash was largely born in England, but it was brought around the world through the empire, in India, in Egypt, Pakistan, all throughout the part of the map that was coloured pink during that period of the Commonwealth. All of those places, they built centres with squash courts and the sports that they played in England. And that's where some of the most skillful players came from, in fact, as you went along. But when they started building squash courts in England, they were all commercial. No one built them as a subsidised thing. There were companies that came to make money. So that started the process of commercialising sport in the UK. I'm not talking about other countries. I can only talk about the UK on this one. Then you had a situation where there was always the Mr. Universe type weightlifting clubs. They were always backstreet clubs. And you'll see the image of a guy with bulging muscles holding a barbell.
Yeah.
You know, and they're all over the world. You'll see them. I remember when I was in South America, I was in Mexico, in a town called Oaxaca, in Mexico, and in the back street, I saw one of these. And they're all over the world there, and they were largely for people either, they were very much, if you'll pardon me using a class thing, they're very much working class.
Right.
Right. You know, men aspiring to be that. And then there was Charles Atlas, David, you remember that, Charles Atlas, who would kick the sand in the face. There were cartoons of the wimp, and he had big muscles there, and he would popularize his process of muscle building.
Yeah.
So there was also muscle building, weightlifting group. However, then in the 1980s, Jane Fonda and other celebrities started dance. They started group exercise, which up until then, there wasn't much. So squash club operators, who were very commercial particularly, suddenly realized instead of having two guys, right, playing for 40 minutes at, let's say, £1 a pop, suddenly you could get 12 girls paying £1 a pop for that same 45 minutes. So you started losing squash clubs, squash courts, you know, to this new culture of group exercise for women.
Yeah, I mean, my mom used to use Jane Fonda. I remember they used to have cassettes that time.
Yeah, exactly right. And I've still got them. And that encouraged town halls and everything to start group exercise. And that I would say was the first real trigger for the idea that fitness exercise could be made available to everybody.
In the early 90s, I remember going up to Harrow Leisure Centre and watching 1,000 women doing step. 1,000?
Yeah.
Wow.
Reebok started coming. Products. What products can we sell to these people? And Reebok got the step. So they had a step class and tried to see what other classes they could have. But I would say that really was the trigger that ignited. Now, there's another thing that David and I went to URSA. I think it must have been 2001 or something. We went to URSA, and there was an unbelievably brilliant speaker there called Tom Peters. He was one of these professional speakers who they bring onto the podium to warm up the audience. Yeah. And he was brilliant. And he gave an example about change. And I think it's very important, because the one thing that an entrepreneur has to take on board is the fact that nothing will be the same tomorrow as it is today. Right? As I've spoken, my words are history. Right? Right now, right, I am creating history, not the future. Change is an inevitability, and unless the entrepreneur takes on board the fact that what they do today may well be absolute history, and they may have to actually destroy and build again tomorrow, they shouldn't bother.
Yeah.
Right? History is littered with companies that have destroyed themselves. Nokia, the phone people, at the cutting edge of technology, within 10 years gone.
Yeah.
Right? Cyan in technology. Kodak, for me, was synonymous with camera.
Yeah.
For David and I growing up, a Kodak was what a camera was.
Yeah.
And they ironically discovered, they invented the digital camera.
Yeah, and they were fucking
but they wouldn't acknowledge it. They put it away because it would affect their film.
Yeah.
Right. Then take the classic one, Lego. Yeah. Lego tool. When you look at what the kids have today at their disposal, Lego is something from the Ice Age as a toy. And yet they've embraced branding, and they've kept it fresh because they've changed with it. So change is the most vital ingredient, to my mind, and our industry is is a great expression of that. However, our industry also creates its own ossification, I think if that's the right word.
Yeah.
It freezes itself because we invest vast sums of money into a centre which you can't then suddenly change tomorrow.
I used to always say this, I wish we had an undo button in this, like Photoshop, just press an undo and that's gone.
I think there is one, but no one's really thought about it. Okay. I really do. And this is something that I'll come to. But let me just take the journey.
Yeah.
So I opened my first squash club in 1979. I opened the second club in 1930, in 1983, 84, called Cafe Sport in the city. And then
Which city was this in?
London.
Okay.
London, just outside the city. Well, we had a huge recession in 1999 through to 93, which was property-led, I would say, but there was a huge recession. People don't realise, they think of every recession as being the only one they've ever seen.
Yeah.
But I have seen a recession in 1973 to 76. I saw a recession when I opened my first club, 1980, during that Thatcher time, the mining strikes and all of that period of time, through 99, through to 83, 84, and then later on at the end of the 1990s, and then 2008, the catastrophic one there.
The subprime. Yeah.
And then we've had COVID. These are cycles. Ironically, the fitness industry benefited from some of those earlier ones because property became available at affordable levels, which they weren't before. Yeah, when a landlord lets an office, he gets 3 times to 5 times the price that he will get from a fitness operator.
Yeah.
But if there's a recession and there are no office people to take it, he needs to fill his space.
Yeah.
And secondary space was readily available during the 1989 through to 93. Property was readily available, and that was the time when all of the big groups started growing.
So what brands were born at that point of time?
Let me just deal with the brand I was involved in, and I'll come back to the others.
Yeah.
But the brands of Fitness First, of LA Fitness, which was the brand I was involved with, of Holmes Place, really all grew during that time. Even Cannons, I would say, grew at that time. Again, another squash player there. John Treharne built his group at that time.
Yeah.
So all of the groups were built during the 1990s, and they all went public between 1995, 6 through to 2000. They grew with different flavors and different ideas. Esporta was the only one that came out of a public company, came out of a public company. It came out of First Leisure, who were a squash group, ironically, as well. And all of the others were private entrepreneurs. And as long as they were in the hands of those private entrepreneurs, they were growing. Now, my own was interesting. I partnered with a guy called Fred Turok and Jeremy Taylor, and the three of us, they brought 2 clubs in, and I had a much bigger club. We had 3 clubs at that point. And in 1994, 3-4, we bought a club called LA Fitness because we wanted a brand. This club was a club where Princess Diana was illegally photographed by a New Zealand entrepreneur who'd opened this club called Bryce Taylor. And this club was in Isleworth, a very ordinary club, and Princess Diana had a private trainer down there. And he changed the little spotlights in the ceiling, 2 of them, for cameras. And he was photographing Princess Diana in compromising situations while she was training. And he sold these pictures to the Daily Mirror. And at that point, the law firms descended on the club, and we then bought the club. And because we wanted the name, we didn't want the name Princess Diana, we wanted the name LA Fitness. We figured that would work. It's no connection to the American LA Fitness.
Yeah.
And we then rebranded ours. We had 2 or 3 more, and we built the group too.
Did you not have a trademark issue with LA Fitness in the US?
No, they didn't. They hadn't registered their trademark at that time.
Okay.
The IP at that time. They started around a similar time.
Yeah, exactly.
They only had 1 club at that time. But we never had any problems.
David, I want to go back to one of the points you made, and this is extremely important for people to appreciate. Back in the day, you took a loan at 20%.
I didn't take the loan at 20%. I took the loan at 9%.
9%, okay.
Right, it ended up at 20%.
Right, so it ended up at 20%. Now, obviously, that's a change that everybody has to go through as during the journey, things will change. Now, today, we have got great infrastructure. The government is promoting entrepreneurship. We've got great infrastructure and ecosystem for entrepreneurs, right? You have this ability where you can use the gig economy, you can get loans from the government wants to push in money, the government wants you to get people fitter, a lot of things are happening. And still people are struggling to build their businesses. Considering where you started, when there was absolutely zero infrastructure for entrepreneurship, what do you think we are lacking today in the industry that we're not able to build? I don't think we have built some really cool brands in the last 10 years who made it massive. what happened if you look at the 70s, 80s and 90s, some fitness brands are still, they're legacy brands now.
I got the story up to the year 2000.
Yeah.
From the year 2000, by that time, Fitness First, LA Fitness, Holmes Place, Cannons, were all public companies. They had access to funds. There was a lot of enthusiasm about the industry. They got to a point a few years later when the analysts couldn't actually see the growth because certainly in the bigger clubs, you are always going to be constrained by the physical space you have.
Okay.
Right? So there will come a point in every club when you will start recruiting and you will lose the same number. Right? It will come in every club's lifetime.
Correct.
And it's largely because the physical capacity is like letting space. When you've let the space, you've let the space.
Yeah.
Right? If you try and put more people into the space, some people are going to have to leave. And that's what happens. So it's a finite sum. And the city analysts began to realize that the growth potential within the thing, because the city is based on growth at the end of the day. It's only based on growth, that you're going to grow your company to be worth more tomorrow than it is today. If that growth is, people perceive that growth, even if it is there, but if it's perceived that growth doesn't go, it's very much why property shares are always undervalued. Because there's a finite thing that you can achieve out of those properties. So then between the dates of 2002 and 2005, every one of those public companies were taken private. The entrepreneurship was taken out of those companies because the entrepreneurs were largely answering to city expectations and not to the welfare of the business. City expectations are, you can't stop them. Every quarter, right, you're reporting. Every quarter you're projecting all the time. And you are not necessarily answering to the long-term welfare of your business. So what happened at that point? They were all taken private by private equity. The entrepreneurs, to some degree, disappeared. Entrepreneurship is what drives the engine.
Correct.
Right. I would also say to you, in answer to what you were saying before, is that one of the dangers is that everybody is encouraged to be an entrepreneur. And I would say 90% of those people do not have the basic personality to be an entrepreneur.
Mindset.
It's not so much mindset. Mindset you can change. It's the personality. So, for example, people risk. Your approach to risk and your understanding of risk. An entrepreneur has to understand risk and has to understand, like most of the people that call themselves entrepreneurs, that's the well-paid leaders and champions of industries, to my mind, are not entrepreneurs. They're very well-paid employees who have managed expectations throughout their career to get to the top of the tree.
Yeah.
Right? Entrepreneurs, for example, understand risk and are prepared to take it.
Yeah. I have an extremely high risk appetite. If I had 100 quid to my name, I'll put all 100 quid on the idea I believe in.
That's not necessarily wise or an entrepreneur. That's a gambler.
Yeah.
There's a difference between a gambler and an entrepreneur.
Is there?
An entrepreneur would understand his risk and will deal with that risk correctly, right? A gambler will risk it without always understanding what that risk is. So I would say that not everybody is an entrepreneur. Those who are not entrepreneurs, there's no shame in that.
Yeah.
It's a different story, that's all. But the entrepreneur is built up as being some wonderful thing. And most of the entrepreneurs do not succeed. For everyone that succeeds, there's 100 that don't.
Yeah.
And for everyone that succeeds, he's probably not succeeded 2 or 3 times before he did succeed. You know, so it's a long story. But then what happened is suddenly, because the entrepreneurs were out of the business, were not evolving that business on a daily basis and experimenting and doing things, but saying, well, if we cut one cleaner off the floor, no one's really going to notice. And hopefully we'll sell the business with a 10% extra, value in a year's time. And we've got 10% on the 20% of cash that we put in, which is a huge return on our money. And that's the way private equity would look at it. They want to return their capital. The entrepreneur looks at it with a mixture of objectives, a wider mixture, and a passion which has to be there. So all of a sudden, the brilliant, for example, yoga teacher, or the brilliant Pilates teacher, or the brilliant private trainer who was training someone who was had a few problems, said, "Why are you doing this here? You only paid that sort of thing. We can open up in a small place. We can take a few hundred square feet. We'll have a studio. I'll back you." Right? Open up your own thing. You're a brilliant trainer. And all of a sudden, this was the birth, to some degree, of the boutique industry. The expertise that people perceived they weren't getting at the big clubs. And I say perceived because there's the same trainers anyhow.
Correct.
But they perceived they weren't getting it. Suddenly, in the high street was opened, charging per class at 5, 6, 7 times what you were paying at the bigger clubs, but it was perceived as expert and community.
Yeah, I think the key was the community. I personally feel that, and this is my take on it, you have the same trainer in a big box gym, he's not able to create and maybe it's not even his intent to create it. On the other hand, if you go to boutique, the entire thing is around experience, around the community.
It's shared experience. It's like when you go skiing, you talk forever with other people about your skis, about the poles, about that sort of thing. And in that case, they were talking, everyone's talking about how many reps did you do, that sort of thing. So it built on community, but it also built on the perception that the expertise was moving to these places. Right, early day.
But which wasn't the case, actually. Which wasn't, because...
Not really.
You still have the same...
The rest was some pyrotechnics.
Yeah.
Like in the spinning classes, you had some pyrotechnics which you didn't necessarily have in the ordinary clubs. Right. But at the end of the day, you're still doing a spin class.
Correct.
Right. So you had that. And as well as that, in Europe, you had MultiFit, which started the boutique industry in Europe.
Yeah.
And John Trahan and... the two groups, started building. John started building the gym group, and then you had Pure Gym.
Yeah.
So these capitalized on this budget idea. There was Easy Gym also came along trying to do it, saying that actually, if we use technology at the entrance of the club, we don't need a reception, right? If we use technology, if we get the price low enough, we can use technology for marketing and people will just sign up.
Correct.
If we take away the idea of an annual contract and they just sign up for a month, what are they putting in there? £10, £19, depending on the area. They'll put that in and give it a try. And marketing online. So they harnessed technology, right? Removed also any employment. So any person who runs a full service club knows that anything between 25 and 40% of your costs are staff.
Yeah.
Right? Suddenly, this went down to 5 to 10%. Right? So they were able to go into places and they were able to build on purely equipment and no staff. And they built traction here.
How did this transition happen? And the reason I'm asking this question is, we have struggled in India to run clubs without staff, right? We don't have a single budget gym chain in India which can operate without staff. So all trainers are employed by us.
But you tell me why.
I don't know. We've not been able to figure out. And that's, if I knew, I would have done it. So my challenge today is, if I am opening a gym in India, I need to hire 10 trainers on my payrolls. I need to have 3 people on sales to do this. And it's such a dichotomy because India is so advanced when it comes to tech. In terms of, even in terms of financial services, the ease to use it, I would say India's 15 years ahead of the UK. We have something called as a UPI. Everybody from the tuk-tuk driver to the hawker on the road, everybody's using that. So we are very good there. Our internet penetration is 10 on 10.
Have there been any trials?
No, there haven't been any trials. And I'll tell you why there have been no trials. Because the moment you, again, like...
I probably would have asked the same question. In 2005, will anyone come to a gym where there's no one to welcome you? Where there's, they do have people on the floor, by the way, but they're private contractors.
Yeah.
And sometimes they're actually paying. In some, there's several different models. And sometimes they're paying to be on the floor, and they're allowed to tout for private training, right? Or they're paid a retainer. Right, and they do that, or.
But David, the entire product is different. I would say the big box gyms are rooms full of metal, and a boutique is a place where you actually train. huge difference. And I've been a gym goer for 2 decades now. I can say, for me, I know what I'm doing. So I go to a place, I don't need to talk to anybody. I need to do my training, get a good session in with my, whoever I'm training with that day, and get lost. Then there are places where where people go in for the experience of it. Like example, you spoke about cycling studios. One of my friends runs this a cycling studio in Manchester called Ride. People go there for the experience. It's not cycling, and like you mentioned, it's not indoor cycling. You can get the same class, cycling 45 minutes, similar calories in another budget gym, but you won't go there for a reason, because you don't get that community feel. You don't get that feel from that class, and I don't know what it is. So going back to where I am, which is say in India, I do not have a single budget chain which operates without employing personal trainers and having a sales team.
Well, I would say 2 things.
Yeah.
Firstly, you have a big opportunity.
Correct.
Right? Get on. I'd do it.
Getting the next flight back to India.
Secondly, you have a situation where they didn't come till 2005, 6. It's that when they start generating. And by that time, there's already a fairly mature market. Like you said, you don't need all of that.
Yeah, you don't.
For you, if you could pay £19 and go in there and you've got the best equipment, that would suit you.
Well, honestly, the first time
what I'm saying is you don't necessarily in India yet have a mature enough market that actually will go on their own to it. They still need the motivation.
Yeah, but I mean, I sound like a fucking dickhead saying this, but I know there is a market, in the sense that there are people like me.
But no one's tried it.
Yeah, nobody's tried it because it just feels too much risk. Second, I think the other problem that we have in India is we don't get typical gym leases in the UK. So there are 2 big aspects you spoke about. One was the real estate play, right? In India, you don't have 20-year leases with a 3-year rent-free period. Not a fucking chance. That's one problem. Second, nobody's leasing gym equipment in India. You have to buy it out. I have friends who run gyms here, and when I came for the first time to the UK,
so you just identified another opportunity.
Yeah.
I think you should be setting up a leasing business.
Yeah.
Right? A leasing business. You could make a terrific turn on the funds that you're running. I mean,
by the end of this
huge business.
By the end of this podcast, you'll have another chair.
It's a huge business. Yeah. Just give me 1% for the idea.
Deal. No. Yeah, honestly, I mean,
you're identifying what happens in markets as they mature. Not everything is there. And there are opportunities that exist that don't exist in the UK that will exist in years to come because our market's not quite ready for it. Everybody says, look to America for what's going to be here in 5 years' time. Right? So in India, perhaps look to Europe. Europe looked to England. Really, the UK was way ahead of Europe.
Yeah.
Right. And the third one, which has had a huge kickstart, the third section of the market, which had a huge kickstart because of COVID, is of course the virtual market, which is vast. Right.
I want to get to the technology bit of it. But we spoke about.
I want to bring my dear friend David, because David and I have been friendly now for, as I mentioned to you before, for 40 years.
Yeah.
And David and I started in the 1980s working together on bits and pieces. But it was really at the end of the middle to the end of the 90s when I was growing LA Fitness that David and I really did a lot of groundbreaking work on not just understanding what was going on, but trying to interpret that as veterans in the industry and try to interpret that and see where that was going and what that could indicate to us for the future, for the present, for the future growth, for the analytics there. And David has been the champion of that and established in Leisure Database and now Leisure DB as it's called, probably the foremost commentator on the industry. There are other people who do data, collect data, but there probably isn't one group that is so respected. And that is all down to David.
Yeah. And I like I said, 2017, when I spoke to people, I said, how do I find out what's happening in the UK fitness industry? They said, just get a report of Leisure DB and you're sorted. And I was surprised that the amount of detailing that went into that report. And I wish, we are now almost 10 years and I still don't think we have 20% of the data in India. maybe not even 10% of their data for the market. We can't take informed decisions. It's all a punt, in terms of, okay, I think this is a good area. I see a lot of people moving around. I think they can pay for it. Let's go to the gym. That's the decision making, So you just look at areas. There's no science behind it, right? And I think obviously it's to do with the fact that India has got 1.5 billion people. So you walk into a city, you've got so many people. And this is where people go wrong in India. They say, oh man, you got 1.5 billion. Guess what? They can't all fucking pay for it, can they? So look at the per capita income and you assume because you got that money that everybody will have that money. The gym memberships till date and you'll be surprised. We've been at 120 pounds to 150 pounds for an annual membership for the last fucking 20 years. It's just not moved. The real estate has gone up. Minimum wages have gone up. Salaries have gone up. Everything has gone up. Membership prices haven't gone up. And I just can't get my head around it. Why is it that we've not been able to do it?
Can I let me interject on that?
Yeah.
Because I think it's important to understand and to give a little bit of a cold shower to the industry. As compared to other industries, you will never make as much money for your endeavors as you do, let's say, in tech or in property or in many other industries. Like if you look at the 10 wealthiest people in property or the 100 wealthiest people in property, you will be running into billions and billions. If you look at the 20 or 30 wealthiest people in tech, you are talking about trillions.
Yes,
right? If you look at the 100, most successful people in the fitness industry, I doubt if you'll find one that's worth 100 million.
Difficult.
Right?
Yeah.
Because it is constrained. It's not an unlimited one. Like, for example, if you are a retailer nowadays, if you get the right fashion and you've got the correct channels of production, you can sell millions of that product.
Gymshark is a classical example.
It doesn't matter how many clubs you have. At the end of the day, you are limited to the income you can make out of each individual club.
Yeah.
The aggregated income. You can't make... Right, so for example, the parallel is football. Football is a multi-billion pound industry. But the football clubs, they don't make much money. The money is made in the rights that are sold.
Yeah.
Right? The money is made in the kit that's sold with the name of the player on the back. There's peripheral industries that are making fortunes. But the actual clubs themselves, I don't think one of them makes any money.
Yeah, so the supplement industry, which thrives on the gym industry, makes more money than the gym industry itself.
Exactly.
And so does
you have to have passion. That's what you've got to want to do it. It's got to be your passion. It's got to be something that you want to do.
Yeah.
Now, we have other things colliding in the empire of the world at the moment. Health. Health is the big... Health and longevity are the big new things that are happening, right? And you need to look at where is the cutting edge research being done now. Cutting edge research, I mean, what's the guy's name who's spending about £1 million a month on trying to live forever? I mean, he's not living now. I don't know why he wants to live forever. If I were living like he's living, I wouldn't want to live at all. Yeah. But he, together with other billionaires, are investing fortunes in trying to understand and crack the code of life, as it were. What are the diet things? What are the exercise things to keep oneself young?
So example, that recovery is one of the businesses.
At some point or other, that will filter down throughout the industry, not just in the industry of the £200 a month or the $1,000 a month clubs.
If you would have asked me 5 years back that recovery would be a sustainable business, I would have said, I don't think so. It was usually an afterthought. And now people are talking about inflation, inflammation, getting rid of that.
And they're talking about that. I mean, the only places that can afford it now are the top end clubs. Correct. But it will filter down at some point. And the second one is health. Nowhere in the world can we afford to service the health needs of our populations. We cannot do it. And the only way we're ever going to be able to do it is to actually hand down responsibility for people's wellness rather than illness. Wellness will avoid illness. And the only way we can do that is by, at some point or other, properly linking wellness, fitness, and illness, connecting those three three pieces of the triangle.
I remember having the discussion. So, Dave Stocker, we coined this thing, more people, more active, more often. And that's something that a lot of associations live by, that, we just need to...
But they've only been slogans.
Yeah.
They've been great slogans.
Yeah.
But the tipping point comes, as you know, when the finances run out.
Correct.
Right. The tipping points for idealists, you can go on and you can stand on a soapbox for all your life.
Yeah.
Shouting, like the classic example is ecology and the state of the planet.
Yeah.
There are people who've been talking about this for 50 years, 100 years.
Yeah.
Even now.
Yeah.
Right. The president of the greatest country in the world is not really realizing it. He's not realizing that we're living off our assets and not off our earnings as a planet. So our earnings as a planet are the sun.
Yeah.
Comes in every day.
Yeah.
The wind goes every day.
Yeah.
These are our income.
Yeah.
Right. And we don't bother to harness it.
Yeah.
What do? Our assets are what's below the earth.
Yeah.
So we're constantly spending our assets and not our income. Now, you wouldn't do that with your money. You live off your income and you use your assets to build a better financial base. We don't do that. So this day it will happen is when financially there's some sort of trigger that says we have no option. And that's where health systems are coming to now in the world. There is no option anymore.
Correct.
Right. And over the next 20 years, I think you will see a huge number of initiatives that are linked to healthcare.
Yeah, there are boutiques which are now only talking health and longevity. I see that trend coming up. And it's like, I would say it's like the new boutiques in a way. They are small boutique studios who are doing, like, there's one in Manchester, I don't know the name. They've just set up a recovery hub. There's one in Swansea. It's called Rico Hub. I'd gone and seen the place. Amazing. And there are people who know the importance of that, and they will start paying for it, and it will become a sustainable business. Now, one of the questions, we spoke about it at lunch, was around the boutiques and why they don't do well. And then, obviously we had a discussion that some do well, some don't do well. When I was in Saudi this time, I was speaking with Kevin Yates, and we spoke a lot about boutiques, and he's of the strong opinion also that boutiques don't do really well. I also feel in the UK, boutiques don't do extremely well. You have to have something about yourself which is different from the others. And secondly, what you said, it's about the person who runs it. So does that mean in your mind that boutiques are not scalable because they're trainer centric, or they're the person who's running the show centric, or you think it's still possible to scale boutique brands across the world?
I think they're much more changeable. If you have a full club, you've got your pool, you've got your gym, you've got your studio, you've got the spa part of it, you've got all of those things there. So to some degree, you can duck and dive with what you want to do, with what your particular interest is at any given time. And I would actually let me come back to what I regard as the makeup of members, right? In a boutique, you've pinned your nail to a particular fashion, right? So as long as that fashion is fashionable, right, you've got a good business.
Like example, spinning.
Yeah. So the day that spinning, someone else comes up with something else and spinning starts declining, your business is vulnerable, number one. And number two, I believe that there is a problem. Brands are very interesting because what does a brand do for you? It promises you a certain basic value proposition. Doesn't matter which brand it is, it will state what its value propositions are, but it will deliver according to those brands. And the reason why brands and franchisors are very strict about their brand is because they live and die by the quality of that brand. And that's what you buy into.
Correct.
However, in the smaller group basis, and even in brands, you are delegating the delivery of your passion to someone else. And the second the ownership of that brand moves into a corporate structure, it is not necessarily driven in the same way as it is by you individually.
Correct.
And based on the fact that a boutique, you're going for the individual, you're going for the handwriting of that individual, there is a limit to how far you can spread that. I also think that the boutiques in particular, the individual and smaller groups, were disproportionately impacted by COVID. Because all of a sudden, people who came for class exercise, right, couldn't come anymore.
Yeah.
So you had a period of 2.5 years when all the business you'd built up disappeared and you had to start building it again. So, for example, and you had the same with clubs.
Correct.
So, for example, that leads me on to the makeup of members. I would say that, broadly speaking, the membership of a mature club are made up of 4 different groups. Groups of obsessions, of people who come what may. They come 3-4 times a week. Every time they come the same thing. Their kit's clean. They wash their. They're absolutely. They are committed to exercise, and they will appear there come what may. You've got another group who are the opposite end of the scale, who are what we would call fitness by association. They buy the best Nike trainers but never run.
Correct.
Right?
That's a lot of them.
And they have to have the membership of the club because I'm a member of that club.
Yep.
And then the more fashionable it is, the more chance there is that you've got a proportion of those. You've then got those that use it regularly, irregularly. And those that use it the opposite, irregularly, regularly. Right. So regularly, irregularly are those people that you can't map a pattern of how they use it, but they will use it throughout the year. 1 week they'll come 2 weeks, and they won't come for a month, and they'll come once, and then they'll come next week for 4 weeks each time, but there's no pattern to it. But throughout the year, you'll see them periodically. The ones that use it regularly, irregularly are the reverse. After Christmas, when they've had this big feast or whatever, Diwali or whatever feast it is, after they had that big feast, they will use it. They will come there on the Monday and they'll become 3 times a week for about 4 or 5 weeks. And then someone will phone up and say, by the way, I've got a meeting on Wednesday. Oh, I normally work out. Sorry, I can't change the meeting. Okay, I'll come. And they fall out the pattern. And you don't see them now for another 5 months until the next festival or the next prompt, right? So you've got the 4 people, the obsessions, the healthy by association, and the 2 others, the regularly, irregularly, and the irregularly, irregularly. But a mature club builds the healthy by obsession is what's the sort of people that people criticize the industry for. So I'll give you a little example, an anecdotal example. When we were floating LA Fitness on the stock market, we had to do the rounds. We had to go to all the institutions, and typically you'll do 8 or 9 institutions in a day. You have your presentation. You tell them what your plans are, what your ambitions are, who the people that are doing it are, what funds you need, and they decide where they're going to invest. As the sort of the closing part of our rounds, and we had about 2 weeks of investor rounds, we went to Scotland. And we arrived in Edinburgh at one of the institutions, a lot of institutions in Edinburgh, and we arrived at one of the institutions at a beautiful office with a glass window overlooking Edinburgh Castle. It was the most beautiful place I've ever been to. It was the end of the day, and it was the end of our presentations. And we trotted out our presentation, and one of the investors who I'd been watching and I felt really wasn't interested, was a woman, said to us in a rather dismissive way, well, your whole industry is based on loads of people who pay their membership and don't come.
Sleepers.
Yeah. So I said to her, look, I suspect you have a lot of clothes in your wardrobe. I said, how many of those have you worn once and not worn again? She said, well, it's actually quite a lot. I said, how often have you gone to a restaurant and not eaten half your meal? I said, it exists in there's no industry that doesn't have sleepers in different forms.
Correct.
Right. And then she said, well, I'm a member, and I think she said it was a Sporter at the time in Edinburgh. I'm a member of the club there, and I never go. So I thought, I'm going to have some fun here, because she's not going to invest. And I said to her, which club is it? She said, it's Sporter. I said, how much do you pay? Say, I pay. Even in those days, I think she paid £49 a month. I said, look, but you never go. She said, no, I never go. I said, is that a promise? So she said, but I never go. I said, fine, I can save you £20 a month. I've got a club, right, which we're selling at £32 a month in London. And if you never go, it doesn't matter whether it's in London or in. So COVID did away with the sleepers.
Yeah.
Every club had to start building its sleepers again, right? It had to start building, every shop had to start building the people that were buying clothes, not to wear, but to wear once and leave on the shelf.
Yeah.
Not just us, every industry lost its sleepers.
Yeah. There's a reset, hard
There's
reset.
a reset. So if you assume that your sleepers are, let's say, 15, 20%, 15 or 20% of your business was unclaimable.
Correct.
At the beginning of post-COVID.
Yeah. And you know, every time we have
the small operators, didn't have access to that money.
Yeah. And I'm telling you, every time we were looking at acquiring a gym, and we had to send them a message, we would be fucking shitting bricks, because you say the moment the message goes out, the sleepers are going to say, oh, I have a gym membership. I'm out of here. Because now so the biggest risk is with the sleepers, and everybody, like you said, every industry has got those sleepers, and it's difficult to do that. Boutiques obviously are completely different.
You're paying as you go.
Yeah, pay as you go.
But you're paying 3-4 times as much.
Right, because you're using, it works at the same thing if you look at it. And I think boutiques would have the category one that you spoke about, which is the guys who are really enthusiastic about going there.
Do you see what's happening?
Yeah.
Is they're gravitating back to being the middle market club.
Right.
That's exactly that. And what happens then is they start diluting the thing that they first came about.
Is it diluting or is it adapting? So I would say if the market, the reason you started...
but I'm saying the second you start having a mix of things, you're in direct competition with a club.
Yeah. And I have seen a lot of gyms fail when they... So if you're close to a pure gym and you're a 5,000 square feet or 10,000 square feet box, there is no fucking chance you're going to survive. Because at 10,000 square feet, you're not able to build a community. You can't give the pieces of kit that a pure gym can give. You can't give it at that price point that they can give. And the reason is because they get better leases than anybody else. I remember losing one. We were planning to do a club in Derby. And I still remember we lost it to JD gyms. There's no way we could have got the deal that they would get, because they're JD gyms and they've earned it. Over the years, they've shown so much success. So if you're a first generation, just started a new gym brand, it's extremely difficult to survive in this market. Boutiques give that opportunity where you spoke about. If I am passionate, I can build a gym at a lesser price. I'll put my heart and soul in this and I'll make this happen. But how do I make sure that when the trend is going, how do I adapt? There's a very good book by Jason Kelly called Sweat Equity. I don't know if you've read that. One of my favorite books on fitness. It's got nothing to do with the fitness in terms of keeping fit, but talks about the health of fitness business. Talks about how Ironman became $1 billion business. The story of Soul Cycles, the story of Flywheel. Talks about all those. Lululemon, how they have captured the community and they've had a value proposition. I don't consider budget gyms as gyms. They're a very good real estate play, right? You leverage a few things. There's nothing about training there. You assume people know what they're doing. They come in, they pay you. It's a direct debit and it's a different business. While we're all in the same industry, fitness industry, a cycling studio and a pure gym and a GD gym are not the same industry in my mind in terms of how they operate and how even the founder thinks about it. So where do you think boutiques will fit in? This is one of the areas which I'm really passionate about. I think we need more boutiques. I need more people who are doing, in smaller populations and making a huge impact. Like I was, one of my episodes was this guy, Ollie Marchon. He's based out of Harpenden. He's doing such fucking amazing work because he's there. He's right there in the mix of things. He's there 24/7. We were going to Harpenden, imagine. And we were driving to Harpenden, and I obviously said this multiple times, but you have to know this. Early morning, we go to a coffee shop and said, I want 6 black Americanos, and says, 6 Americanos, 2 of you, you don't look, you're from here. I said, yeah, we've traveled from Manchester. Jake and I were traveling, and he said, okay, but why are you in Harpenden? I said, we're here for a podcast shoot. He says, who are you shooting the podcast with? I said, Ollie Marchand. He said, okay, the coffee's around the fucking house. In Harpenden, it doesn't happen anywhere. And the reason this happened was because he is so deeply embedded in the community.
It's hard to keep that if you want to expand.
Right. So scale.
Yes.
So it comes at a
On
cost.
boutiques, by the way, David's much more authoritative than I am. He's tested everyone out. I opened a group of them, and unfortunately COVID killed them. And I opened one of the early ones with using a wearable to measure people's.
Yeah, in the US, everybody loves boutiques.
Yeah.
I don't know why it doesn't work. At least that's what I've been told, that boutiques don't work well in the UK.
I don't think they don't. I think good ones work well.
Mm-hmm.
And that's probably true of most businesses.
Define good. So it's very subjective. What do you mean by good?
Well, the quality experience that people get.
So you would say experience is one. Okay.
Well, it's more than one. It's about 10 out of.
You look at it, it's pretty simple. It's pretty straightforward, but I just don't know how and why people can't figure this out. I mean, I have not been able to figure out, honestly. I can now that you say this, I'm actually visualizing, So I go to a gym in Rottenstall where I am staying right now. And there's a yoga class. It's the same yoga instructor. She does a class. She's very good with what she does. She, in fact, she goes every year to India to train and improve her skills. And when she does this class at that particular gym, the big box gym, people aren't talking as much as they are when she's conducting the class in another facility, which is she just rents out a hall in a church, which has not even got the infrastructure that the gym has got, but it's a lot more engaging, if I were to say. And her class is exactly the same. There's no difference in the class per se. She's putting in the same effort.
But there's a difference in the customers.
Yes.
Because the customers have specifically chosen to come there just for that reason and just to meet with members of that community. Whereas in a general club, they're there for a lot of, I'll try yoga. They haven't, I'll try yoga. Yeah, I quite like that. It wasn't great, but it was okay. It was a good experience. So it's the customers there.
So boutiques are going to be all about the experience, how they differentiate it, how well you engage with the community. They will always have a challenge, I feel, in scaling up, because you need to consistently take the experience to, if you're doing 1,000 sites, it's not, so example is Orange Theory, right? I think they've done phenomenally well with about 1,200-1,300 studios that they've got.
Yeah, but not everything transfers. Most things are about execution. Once you've got a good concept, it's about the execution.
So do you
also,
think the product was
brands,
good?
if you look at car brands, they try and find names that work in as many territories as possible. Orange Theory to an English person doesn't say anything. I mean, I don't know what Orange Theory is. I mean, to me, it's a mobile phone.
That sounds about right.
Okay.
Yeah.
So, why would I go there? What is it? I don't know. And I know the industry. I still don't know what Orange Theory really is.
The concept behind it.
Yeah. So a lot has to do with the people who market it, how it's marketed. And, like, for example, I mean, I don't know what happened with F45, but F45 was the fastest growing one, and it fell apart. So
why do you think it happened?
I used to give a lecture on leisure property, thing called the Leisure Property Forum, which David's also spoken at. And the title of one of my lectures was, "You are defined by what you turn down as much as by what you actually take." And sometimes you are defined by that in a big way. That as I mentioned before, any group, as you expand, you will have some sites that don't work very well. And you will have some that are super performers, and then you'll get the balance which contribute well to your portfolio in a different, being able to ensure that the ones you select are the right ones is very important. I don't know the background of F45, so I may be speaking out of turn completely, but I suspect that there were some franchises that were not well chosen location-wise. I don't really know. Also, sometimes if you grow a business too quickly, it can have nothing to do with the product. It can have to do with, the business dynamics. And I'm not privy to that. So,
yeah,
but I think it is hard. A boutique, you go for personality, and it's very important that you select your franchisees to make sure they reflect that.
Yeah. I think boutique is a person. If you ask me, a boutique, like you said, has to have a personality. And I think recruiting franchisees it's a make or break at that point of time. If you've got the wrong person who's going to lead that, and I can tell you with my own experience, I had, of all my franchises, 32 were franchisees. Every single one which was doing well was a guy who believed in the product, who was on the floor, who was there in the business, whose business was not run by their manager. It was run by the owner. The owner was in it.
Yeah, I would give you a little bit of experience of mine on that. When we were about 60 clubs at LA Fitness, we decided we wanted to understand the manager and the effectiveness of a manager, who was effective, who wasn't, what were the tools that a manager needed. We were not looking to get rid of ineffective managers or promote others. We were trying to understand what was required of a manager. And we gave all 60 clubs at that time, we asked them to diarize every minute of their day for a week. We collected all of those and put them against the successes of clubs to see what they were doing, what the successful ones were doing. And almost without exception, in a full service club, you'll have the manager, and then you'll have the head of sales, head of fitness, head of front of house, head of marketing. You'll have 2 or 3 heads of department. The managers that spent more time with their heads of department, training, supporting, right, and monitoring their activity, were 100% the most successful clubs management. Not the ones that were wandering around outside.
Yeah.
The ones that were getting their department heads to actually, really believe in what was going on, understanding what was required, monitoring their success rates and everything like that. They were the most successful. It's interesting.
Yeah. David, we spoke about an interesting thing. You had started a fitness wearable brand a couple of years before Fitbit.
We did.
Can you run us through that story and what happened? What was the journey like?
As you said, is you can very often learn more from the things that don't succeed than I won't call them failures. Let me call them the things that don't succeed than the things that do succeed. When I sold my shares when I left LA Fitness in 2005, when it went to private equity, it corresponded with the same time that Alan Fisher of Holmes Place, who founded Holmes Place, had sold his interest in Holmes Place, except in Europe, which I later on worked with him on. And we had been friends for many years throughout the industry, and were friends socially. And we thought, what are the things we haven't done and the industry hasn't done? And we identified 3 areas. One was technology. The industry was very poor in technology. It still is, I would say. It's still not joined up. The other one was getting it into the high street, right? Because it was still dependent on boxes you had to go to. And the third one was leisure property. Now, let me just quickly tell you about the boutique stuff that we did. We partnered with Bupa, the private healthcare providers, and we built a proposition. We had invested in the Power Plate project, which we were shareholders in at the time, and we had a wearable technology which we had pioneered 2 years before Fitbit started, and ours was called Fitbit. It doesn't need a genius to realize that Fitbit copied a lot of what we were doing. If you just look at the chronology, it couldn't have been the other way around.
Correct.
So we decided that everyone actually does do a lot of exercise, aerobic exercise. Our general gyms are made up of 2 components, resistance and aerobics.
Correct.
Okay, you've got yoga and everything, which is in the mind and more relaxing, but principally a gym is made up of 2 single areas. We decided that aerobic, everyone does it. It's just a matter of monitoring what they do and encourage them to do more. So our Fitbug monitored hour by hour what people were doing. So we set up some retail units with Bupa, whereby people would come in, we would download what they'd done on their Fitbug and advise them how to link their day such they did more. Right, and we used PowerPlay, which were in the situ, so people didn't have to come with kit; they could come with their own clothes and do amplified resistance exercises on the PowerPlay. Brilliant, groundbreaking, because the whole barrier to the high street was the fact that people had to come with kit and change and everything like that. So we said, let's do away with that completely. Anyhow, to cut a long story short, the management of Bupa changed. They decided it wasn't for them, that they wanted to concentrate on health insurance. Don't know why, rather than boutique health. But we pioneered the boutique ideas, and we had about 10 of them at that time across the country. And the other one was this wearable, which was the first one we did, which was Fitbug. And the idea was that we would collect your data. So if you're on a treadmill, you're walking. If you're not on a treadmill, you're still doing activity. We would collect that data and feed back to you, and you can check it all back. And we had websites, everything. It was pretty ambitious. The issue with us and Fitbit was that Fitbit came out of America. America in Silicon Valley was geared to traction rather than profits at that time, which meant that they would for every million we raised, they raised 10. And for every expectation they had for us, they had no expectation for them. So
they were looking at scale at that point.
They were looking at scale, and we, unfortunately, because we were raising the money in the UK, the UK investment funds for IT things there were, when are you going to make money? Right? And as I said to you, if Amazon would have had that, there would be no Amazon today.
Correct.
They were encouraged to get traction. And once they got traction, then they looked at how to make a profit out of it.
And you started this in 2005. So this is 3-4 years before Fitbit.
Yeah. In fact, the idea we gestated earlier on, about 2003, 2004. But anyhow, it was an interesting ride and fascinating experience. And we learned a lot about the industry. But, so we've done technology, we've done boutiques, and we've done the groups. And
I think LedgerDB has completely changed the way people looked at data for our industry. I think before pre-LedgerDB, right, we were all shooting in the dark, right? I think we had no data, but there was only anecdotal evidence for everything, hearsay, and then that's what made people take decisions. And like I said, we have that problem in India. I think hopefully this year we're going to work together and get our first industry report in India. That will be a big step for us in the industry, and especially for players to come in from outside of India. One of my challenges when I tell people, man, dude, India is a great market, let's go to India, is that tell me what the data looks like. I said, fucking don't know. No, I mean, and I'm being honest. I'm just being. We're full of independence. India is a very big country. We say India's got two parts, India and Bharat. So tier 2 is different. They operate in a different way. Tier 1 is very different. Everybody's aspiring to get the best. It's a growing economy. Disposable income is going up, but I don't think we have enough products, and we don't have enough interest from outside. I don't think too many brands from outside were invested. What we spoke about Saudi Arabia. A lot of people are now going to Saudi thinking that that's going to be a big market. But guess what? India is going to be a bigger market than that. It's just that people don't realize it, and there isn't enough data. So I think that we will be doing service to the Indian fitness industry by getting that report out to people. Because guess what? People from the industry are going to be surprised with what they see and what they read in the industry on that report about the industry. I can be 1,000,000% sure about it, because I will be surprised myself. I don't know.
We can't wait to surprise you.
On that note, thank you, David. I think there's a part two for this.
It's our pleasure.
100%. Thank you.